What's up guys, it's July 4th weekend as I'm recording this, so I hope you're all having a great, well-deserved break for your mental. I hope you're all taking this time to recharge and just kind of like get a better feel for relaxation and taking a well-deserved break that you all do deserve. I'm going camping for a couple of days in the woods to recharge because I just kind of need to get away from all like the technology and like computers and stuff, so that'll be a fun time. And yeah. So getting into the topic of today's video, I would like to talk about how I personally would take a project from planning to design to implementation or coding to testing and then finally deployment. And this is all based on a comment that you saw in the beginning of the video. So yeah, I was just gonna get right into it. So first things first, you're gonna need some sort of an idea. It doesn't need to be something new. It doesn't even have to be unique. It could be something as plain old as the typical to-do list app, where you track tasks that you need to do and it marks them off when you complete them. Might not even need to do this, but we'll get into that a little bit later. Like I said before, your idea doesn't have to be anything crazy, because if you take it through the steps of planning, design, testing, and deployment, you're gonna learn a ton about the software development process in general. And so in terms of like taking a project from start to finish, I'd say the idea is probably the least important part, because you're gonna learn the most from doing the other steps. So for the sake of this video, we're gonna use a hypothetical to-do list application. So starting off with planning, you're gonna need to plan out exactly what your to-do list app is gonna do. Now that might seem obvious to some of you, but it really isn't as obvious as you might think. What if your user wants to see tasks that they've already completed? What if they want to see tasks that completed a year ago or multiple years ago? You would need some sort of search function. What are the limitations of your to-do list application? Are you gonna have scheduling? Are you gonna have alarms, notifications? Could you send them a text whenever they have something that they need to do? So planning here is gonna pertain mostly to your audience and what you're gonna allow them to do and how you're gonna allow them to do it, or like what technologies you're gonna use to allow them to do it. You could use something like Twilio to implement text messaging, or maybe you want to learn how to use the iOS Kids notification system to send notifications to people's iOS phones. So here again, we're gonna be planning what our app will do and what technologies we're going to use to allow our audience or users to do those things. So planning is also gonna get into sort of like what technologies you use. If you're making a web app, it kind of pertains to like which frameworks and libraries you're gonna be using. Because if you make a web app, you're mostly gonna be using like a React, Vue, or AngularJS type of library or framework to make your application. If you're doing something on mobile, are you gonna have cross-platform, or are you gonna have a native solution like Kotlin or Swift? These sorts of things really impact the maintainability, scalability, and most importantly, the motivation factor of wanting to complete your application. If you're coding in assembly, are you really gonna wanna finish it? Are you gonna be motivated to finish your project the entire time? Because if you don't wanna finish it, then this whole video and the whole process of taking it through deployment isn't really gonna be possible, because you need to complete it in order to ship it. So on to step 2, designing your application. Designing your application is kind of like planning it, but it's a little bit in between planning and coding, literally in the process and actually in when you do it and how it works. When I design applications, I think about things like actually deciding what differentiates my application. Maybe my to-do list application is gonna have certain keywords that are tags that you can attach to each task, and then you're gonna be able to see a data visualization of how many complete on each week and what kind of tasks you're doing the most of. Something like that. How is that gonna look? How is your user gonna feel when they see it? Do you wanna see it and feel proud of yourself, or do you wanna see it and have something to work towards? You're kind of like designing the user interface and user experience. And this is gonna have a lot to do with how your user feels when they're using your application. And in the design process, something that is the most important that I've always found success with doing is you have to ask yourself, what is your audience thinking at every point in the application? Your user is gonna have to know what they're doing at every point or every screen on your application. And what that's gonna do is make it intuitive. And why you want your app to be intuitive is because you have to spend less time on customer support, less people will get frustrated and just quit your app, and you're just gonna have an overall better experience for your audience. Like I said before, the biggest step in the design process is choosing your audience. If I'm targeting college people, my to-do list app is going to be a lot different from if I was targeting senior citizens or middle-aged people that go grocery shopping a lot, or people that are running a service-based business that need to keep track of different things. All these people have different needs, and so your audience is exactly who you're focusing on for your application. If you choose a broad range, like people 18 to 30, it's going to be really hard to narrow down exactly what those people are in some scenarios. And so that's why I say, like, choosing your audience is almost like niching down, and it's going to make the entire process a lot easier for you. One thing I like to do when I make an application or go through this process is start really simple. So like with the core idea or the core feature of what you want your users to be able to do. For a to-do list app, maybe that's, like I said, you can write tasks, you can complete them, and then it shows a little graph over time, say the last week. That's like the simplest version of your core features, or like minimum viable product. And by doing that and not doing anything else, enabling your audience to do those things, you can add on more features later. Maybe they can do a day, not a week. Maybe they can do a year, a week, a month, etc. Maybe they can add more tasks and search tasks. But if you start with the bare minimum, it's going to be a lot easier for you to actually go to completion and deployment, and then add more features as you go on. And what this does, and it's what a lot of big companies do as well, is it leads to a shorter build, measure, learn feedback loop. And what that basically means is that you build something, you measure your customer audience satisfaction, and then you learn from those measurements so that when you build again or improve that feature, it's going to be better and give you more leads and things like that. And basically it makes you more productive as a application developer or a company, if that's what you're trying to do. So step 3, onto testing. Testing is kind of a tricky subject to talk about because it really depends on what framework and language and what like ecosystem you're developing for. So for example, I'll talk about React. If you're using React, you're most likely going to be testing using Jest and React Testing Library. And for those, you're going to be testing different interactions and different like things that are supposed to be on the screen at different points in your application. So if my user clicks this button, is this element going to be on the screen with this text in it? Is it going to be the correct color at that moment? And you can do that with most things in your application that are going to be on the screen, and that's just like using Jest, for example. You want to test each screen and make sure like the core things, the most important things are going to be on there. But I'd say as the bare minimum, you want to write unit tests for the core things in your application, just to make sure that your user sees what is important at the right time. Moving on to step 4, deployment. Deployment for me ends up either being the easiest part of a project or the most difficult by far, and for whatever reason that happens to turn out a lot of the time when I'm doing something. So it really depends on where you're building your app. If you're building a web app, say with React, it might be as simple as, you know, building your React application, you plop it into the hosting solution, you set up a domain, and you're good. You can just run your React server. If you're doing something like a mobile application, you need to get it verified by Apple or Google, and depending on their rules and what your app is about, it might get rejected. There are certain windows of time that they have to approve an app. It might take up to 10 days or something like that, and it can really hinder your productivity. If you're doing a platform-specific app, you need to get permission from, say, Meta, Facebook, right? Shopify, or one of those types of platforms, and they can be really finicky about different things as well. And so because of this reason, it can really hinder your productivity, like I said earlier, or it can be really easy, drag and drop, and then you're done. I'd say it's really specific to what framework and like how you're building your application. So I definitely look into that before you start. So like I like to look into how easy it is to host things, how expensive it is, what are like generally the easiest ways to host certain things. Like Next.js, I think they have one-click hosting on Vercel's platform because they make Next.js. But things like that can be expensive, or more expensive than something like AWS, which can be more expensive than, say, Azure or Heroku. There are tons of ways to host different things like databases and servers and things like that. So I definitely look into what is necessary and what most people use when they're in your position. If you're using a well-known library, people have definitely done this before or something similar to what you're doing. And so I would basically follow that, see where you can cut costs and where it's easier to switch over different things. And generally, that's all you should need to know about deployment. So that's going to be the 4 steps that I would take to take a personal project through deployment. I hope this video was informative for all of you. I know that a lot of you are going to be working on your developer portfolios because it's the summertime, or maybe you have some time off from work or after your internships and things like that. You should all make sure to keep lead coding because interview season is coming up in a few months here. I do enjoy doing projects through deployment, and I think that they can be a huge boost in creativity because you're flexing that idea muscle. Since you're not following a tutorial, you don't really know the steps to everything. And so I highly encourage everyone to try doing a project. It doesn't matter if you get through deployment or not, because most people give up on tons of projects. I am one of those people whose GitHub is full of projects that they started and never even got close to finishing. So don't feel bad about that. Yeah, so be sure if you enjoyed the video to leave a like and comment what you want to see next. And if you enjoy content like this, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Thank you guys so much, and I hope you have a great rest of your week.